On June 15, 1863, a Union lieutenant named George Breck wrote to his hometown newspaper, "No sight of the enemy yet, but we shall run across him in a few days unquestionably, then look out for a desperate battle. When will it take place, we wonder?" Breck's question was answered in 2 weeks. A battle whose size, scale, and ferocity eclipsed all others before it would take place at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. For 3 days, July 1st through July 3rd, 1863, over 165,000 soldiers fought one of the most crucial battles of the American Civil War here. At stake was the survival of the Union, the future of slavery in America, and so also the future of freedom in this country. Your present position is indicated by the white light on the map. The town of Gettysburg, with a wartime population of 2,400, is north of us about 1 mile. Note that the map is oriented as marked along its edges. What gave Gettysburg military importance were the 8 major roads that met there. In early June of 1863, the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia under General Robert E. Lee, 75,000 strong, advanced from Virginia into Pennsylvania. Lee sought a battlefield victory that would strike a mortal blow to Northern morale and possibly lead to a negotiated peace and Southern independence. By the end of June, Lee's army was located west, north, and northeast of Gettysburg. After finding Union cavalry at Gettysburg on June 30th, powerful Confederate forces advanced upon the town from the west and north. They did not expect a battle. The Union cavalry would be easily driven away and the road junction secured. The Union Army of the Potomac, 95,000 strong, and commanded by General George Gordon Meade, was advancing through Maryland toward Gettysburg from the south. Meade had orders to stay between the invading Confederates and Washington, D.C., the capital. Therefore, when the Battle of Gettysburg started, the Northern forces came in from the south, and the Southern forces came in from the north and west.
With the Confederates on the offensive, the battle would develop along these lines, with the main attacks from the west to the east, which will be our main perspective. East will be at the top of your frame, and north to the left.
July 1st. The first troops to arrive were Union cavalry under General John Buford. They took up positions west and north of town on June 30th. Early on July 1st, Buford's forces west of town were attacked by Confederate forces advancing along the Chambersburg Pike. Union infantry under the command of General John Reynolds soon arrived and drove the Confederate advance back, but at the cost of Reynolds, who was killed near this spot. He was the highest-ranking general to fall in the battle. Both sides received reinforcements later that morning and early afternoon, but the Confederates had the superior numbers. The Union forces formed to defend the western and northern approaches to Gettysburg. The Confederates attacked that afternoon from the west, north, and northeast. Desperate fighting ensued. The bullets were flying from each side in a perfect shower, wrote one soldier. In the hard fighting that followed, the Union right flank on Barlow's Knoll crumbled, and the remainder of the Union forces on the left and center were dislodged and compelled to retreat. The Confederates pressed the retreating Union troops through the streets of Gettysburg, scooping up many prisoners. The Union line fell back to Cemetery Hill, where they rallied and reorganized their lines and received some reinforcements of fresh troops. The Confederates did not attack on the evening of the 1st of July. Instead, they were content to reorganize their line in this manner. As the campfires began to appear behind the lines the night of July 1st, the two armies occupied these positions. To sum up the first day, The Union forces were driven back through the town of Gettysburg, a distance of nearly 2 miles, and the retreat ended here, on Cemetery Hill. Cemetery Hill was key terrain, for cannon placed here controlled the Gettysburg Road network. This gave the Union Army an important advantage of position. In the meantime, the Confederate commander, General Lee, arrived on the field and made his headquarters here. General Meade, the Union commander, arrived and made his headquarters here. Meade's headquarters are about 600 yards northwest of the Visitor Center, our present location. During the night, a few additional campfires appeared behind the Confederate line, out along the Chambersburg Road, marking the approach of Lieutenant General James Longstreet's 1st Corps. But behind the Union lines, many additional campfires were seen, indicating the arrival of large numbers of reinforcements. This buildup of Union power took shape throughout the morning of July 2nd, and as the campfires winked out behind the lines, the newly arrived Union troops moved into position along the front. Note that the Union front lines resembled an upside-down fishhook. The two armies held these positions as they prepared to renew the battle on July 2nd. July 2nd. General Lee planned to attack again on July 2nd. Longstreet's 1st Corps, with support from A.P. Hill's 3rd Corps, would make the main attack, moving into position to attack the Union left flank. Ewell's 2nd Corps would demonstrate on the Union right to prevent them from sending reinforcements to the Union left. While Longstreet's men marched into position for the attack, Union General Daniel Sickles positioned his 3rd Corps. Acting without orders, he advanced his 10,000 men to a new position nearly 1/2 mile ahead of the main Union line. Sickles' line formed in this manner. An angle was formed in the line at the famous Peach Orchard, along the Emmitsburg Road, the present-day Business Route 15. The left of the line rested at a large collection of boulders called the Devil's Den. Longstreet's men began to form a line of battle along Seminary Ridge and Warfield Ridge around 2:30 in the afternoon. At 3 p.m., he attacked. After an artillery bombardment, he opened his infantry attack by advancing his right toward Big Round Top, the large hill at the southern end of the battlefield. Big Round Top held no immediate importance because it was wooded and too rugged for artillery. The smaller hill to the north, Little Round Top, had recently had its western face cleared of trees, which provided observation and good fields of fire. It became a key position at Gettysburg. If the Confederates captured this hill, they may well have won a victory at Gettysburg, because, from the crest, their artillery would have commanded all the ground between our present location and Little Round Top. General Gouverneur K. Warren, the chief engineer of the Army of the Potomac, rode to Little Round Top shortly before Longstreet's attack struck. He rushed a brigade of 1,300 men to guard it, and just as the brigade was positioned, the Confederates struck in this fashion. This one brigade checked them until another arrived. Then the two brigades stopped the Confederate advance and compelled them to fall back. In the meantime, additional Confederate units of Longstreet's corps were attacking. They struck the Union line at the Devil's Den, then in the wheat field and the southern front of the Peach Orchard position. Devil's Den was lost, but reinforcements sent by General Meade counterattacked and held the line in the wheat field. Around 6 p.m., Longstreet sent the last of his troops forward. They struck the Peach Orchard position head-on and broke the Union line. During this fighting, General Sickles had his right leg nearly severed by a Confederate shell and was carried from the field. Longstreet's Confederates drove the Union line back in this fashion and launched another assault on Little Round Top. A Union soldier described the nature of the battle. the deafening shouts of the combatants, the crash of artillery, the trembling ground beneath us, the silent and stricken countenances of the men, the curtain of smoke over all, and its peculiar smell made up a picture never to be forgotten by any who witnessed it. Meade had moved more reinforcements to the threatened point, and the attack was repulsed. The farthest advance of that particular portion of Longstreet's column is marked by the little stream in the Valley of Death, which became known as Bloody Run. In the meantime, the left of the attacking column, including troops from both Longstreet and A.P. Hill's corps, swept the Union 3rd Corps line back to Cemetery Ridge. The Union defenders along the ridge were reinforced by troops Meade rushed over from the right of his line. They held firm and drove the Confederate attackers back. Unable to remain in the open, these Confederate troops fell back to the protection of Seminary Ridge. Longstreet's men on the right managed to hold on to much of the ground they had gained, but the key terrain on this part of the field, Little Round Top, remained in Union hands. This ended the fighting on the southern end of the field during the second day. We move now to Culp's Hill, indicated by the white light, the right flank of the Union Army. Culp's Hill is 3/4 of a mile northeast of this visitor center. Spangler's Spring is located at the base of that hill. The hill was defended by the 12th Corps. Most of this corps were withdrawn by General Meade during the late afternoon to reinforce his embattled left flank. Only one brigade guarded the eastern face of the hill, but it had well-built breastworks for protection. Towards sunset, 3 Confederate brigades attacked this one Union brigade, but were unable to dislodge it. However, on the southwestern slope of the hill, the Confederates found the 12th Corps trenches empty and occupied them. By this time, darkness had fallen, and the Confederates were unable to exploit this small success. When the attack went forward against Culp's Hill, 2 other brigades of Ewell's Corps assaulted East Cemetery Hill. They swept forward from positions near the edge of Gettysburg, overwhelmed the Union infantry along the base of the hill, and parts of both brigades reached the summit of the hill. Hand-to-hand fighting swirled about the Union artillery, but Union reinforcements rushed over from Cemetery Ridge and other parts of Cemetery Hill, counterattacked, and drove the Confederates back. The Battle of July 2nd was over. Both sides had suffered thousands of casualties, yet the Army of the Potomac still held all the key terrain. Yet General Lee believed that with a coordinated attack by his army on July 3rd, he could still win the battle. His original plan for July 3rd was similar to July 2nd. Ewell would strike the Union right at Culp's Hill, while Longstreet, reinforced by the fresh division of General George Pickett, would renew its offensive against the Union left. A force of Confederate cavalry, under General Jeb Stuart, was ordered to move beyond the Confederate left and threaten the rear of the Union Army and its line of supply and communications. July 3rd. The fighting at Culp's Hill began about 4 in the morning on July 3rd. During the night, the Union 12th Corps had returned so that the Union position on the hill was strong. Repeated Confederate attacks were repulsed with heavy loss. By about 11 a.m., with their men exhausted and losses high, the Confederate commanders concluded they could not break the Union defenses, and they withdrew their men, ending the threat to the Union right flank. The coordinated attack upon the Union left by Longstreet's corps never happened that morning. Confusion and miscommunication thwarted Lee's plan, and Longstreet argued that the Union left flank was too strong to attack again. Unwilling to quit the battlefield when he sensed that victory remained within his grasp, Lee adjusted his plans. Instead of striking the Union left, he would mount a massive frontal assault upon the Union center along Cemetery Ridge. First, the Union lines would be subjected to a concentrated artillery bombardment. Then, an infantry assault force of some 12,000 men would cross the mile of open ground and smash a hole through the center of the Union Army's lines. Longstreet would command the attack, although he strongly disagreed with it. Today it is known as Pickett's Charge, after General George Pickett, whose division formed part of the assault force. The attack was neither a charge, nor did General Pickett command it, but his name would become forever attached to it. It took all morning to complete the preparations for the attack, and by the time all was ready, the Confederates had withdrawn from Culp's Hill. Lee's hope for victory at Gettysburg now rested on Longstreet's grand attack. At 1 p.m., 2 signal guns fired on the Confederate lines. Moments later, some 150 cannon along Seminary Ridge opened fire upon the Union center. Union artillery soon replied, until nearly 100 guns were blazing away from Cemetery Hill to Little Round Top. Recalled one soldier, "Who can describe such a conflict as is raging around us? The thunder and lightning of these 250 guns and their shells, whose smoke darkens the sky, are incessant, all-pervading." For nearly 2 hours, both sides exchanged fire in an artillery duel that could be heard over 40 miles away. Then Union commanders, believing that an infantry assault would soon follow, ordered their guns to stop firing in order to prepare for it. Confederate officers, noting the slackening of the Union fire, thought that perhaps they had damaged the Union defenses enough for the infantry assault to succeed. A reluctant nod from Longstreet was the signal that sent 12,000 men forward. They were drawn from Pickett's division of Longstreet's corps and 2 divisions of A.P. Hill's corps, now commanded by Generals James Pettigrew and Isaac Trimble. They scarcely came into view of the Union lines before the Union artillery reopened fire. Shell, shot, and shrapnel ripped the advancing Confederate lines. As the Confederate infantry neared the Emmetsburg Road, the Union guns began to fire canister like giant shotgun charges, and then the Union infantry opened fire. Confederate soldiers fell by the hundreds. The survivors swept on across the road and up the slope of Cemetery Ridge, with dozens falling at every step. In the course of its advance, Pickett's division's right flank was exposed and unprotected. Union commanders sent 2 large Vermont regiments forward like a swinging door to strike this open flank. Their heavy flanking fire did great damage to the Confederate attackers. At nearly every other point along the line, murderous Union fire checked the Confederate advance, but at an angle in the Union defensive line near a small copse of trees, they broke through. This would become known as the high water mark. The Union line rallied and contained the Confederate breach. Fighting was at point-blank range. Everybody was loading and firing as fast as they could, recalled one soldier. Soon, Confederate resistance began to collapse. Many began to retreat. Others surrendered. Union troops swept forward and recaptured the angle. Hundreds lay dead or wounded. The Confederate attack had failed. In less than 1 hour, nearly 1/2 of the men who made the famous assault were dead, wounded, or captured. The final maneuver at Gettysburg occurred 5 miles east of the main battlefield. Several brigades of Union cavalry under General David M. Gregg were patrolling those fields. One of these brigades was commanded by a 24-year-old brigadier general, George Armstrong Custer. During the afternoon they made contact with Jeb Stuart's brigades, who were seeking a route to the Baltimore Pike, the main Union supply route and line of communications. Skirmishing between dismounted troopers ensued, but as the fighting escalated, mounted forces were fed into the battle, and a large-scale cavalry engagement developed. Neither gained an advantage, but Stuart concluded that the route to the Union rear was effectively blocked, and he withdrew from the field. The Battle of Gettysburg was essentially over. The Union Army had held and repulsed every major attack by Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. The following day, July 4th, the two armies sat facing each other and nursing their wounds. During the evening of July 4th, in a pouring rain which must have reflected their mood, the Army of Northern Virginia started the withdrawal that ended the bloodiest event ever to take place on the American continent. 51,000 soldiers, Americans all, 30% of the armies involved, were casualties in the 3 days of bitter fighting. In their most desperate hour, George G. Meade and the Army of the Potomac had prevailed, and the hope for eventual Union victory in the war rekindled. 4.5 months after the battle, on November 19th, President Abraham Lincoln attended the dedication of the new Soldiers' National Cemetery on Cemetery Hill. In his brief Gettysburg address, Lincoln defined for all Americans what was at stake at Gettysburg and in the war. The war, he said, was a test, whether any nation conceived and dedicated to the principle that all men are created equal could long endure. His words still echo over the battlefield and the graves of those who died. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.